A millionaire invited her black driver as a joke to mock him, but when he arrived, everyone was surprised. "Honey, did you really invite your driver to my gala?" Victoria Ashworth's shrill voice cut through the air in the hall like a sharp blade, causing several heads to turn toward the main entrance. Across the elegant hall of the Continental Hotel, Jonathan Williams discreetly adjusted his tie and took a deep breath. At 34, he had spent the last 3 years driving for Chicago's most arrogant heiress, enduring daily insults and being treated like invisible furniture. But tonight would be different. "Oh, Victoria, relax," laughed Isabella Montenegro, the millionaire owner of a chain of jewelry stores, as she waved her champagne glass dramatically. "I thought it would be hilarious to bring Jonathan. Just imagine, him in the middle of all these important people, not even knowing how to hold a fork properly." Isabella's friends burst into cruel laughter, their designer dresses swaying as they reveled in the prospect of the night's free entertainment. To them, Jonathan was nothing more than a toy, someone to ridicule between canapés and French champagne. What they didn't know was that Jonathan had observed every move, every whispered conversation, every questionable transaction Isabella had made in recent years. While she treated him as part of the car's decor, he memorized names, dates, places. His mind photographed documents left in the back seat, recorded private phone conversations, catalogued every piece of evidence of tax evasion and money laundering. 3 weeks earlier, Isabella had made her biggest mistake. "Jonathan, you're going to love this," she said, practically shouting into the phone from the back seat. "I managed to transfer another $2 million to the Cayman Islands without the IRS having any idea where the money is." She laughed loudly, completely oblivious to the fact that Jonathan had discreetly activated the recorder on his cell phone. After all, who would suspect that a simple black driver would have the audacity, or the intelligence, to document his boss's crimes? "My God, Isabella, look at him," whispered another socialite, discreetly pointing to Jonathan standing at the entrance. "I bet he doesn't even know which fork to use for salad." Jonathan smiled inwardly. If only they knew that he had graduated magna cum laude in law from Northwestern University before family circumstances forced him to take any job he could get. If only they knew that he had spent the last 3 years not just driving, but meticulously building the case that would destroy Isabella's empire. Isabella approached him with a condescending smile. "Jonathan, I'm so glad you came to my little event. Try not to touch anything too expensive, okay?" She winked at her friends, who laughed like well-dressed hyenas. "Thank you for the invitation, Miss Montenegro," he replied with a calmness that made Isabella frown for a split second. There was something different in his tone, a subtle confidence she had never noticed before. While everyone mocked his presence in that elite environment, Jonathan carried in his inside pocket not only his cell phone with compromising recordings, but also a copy of the documents proving Isabella's tax evasion scheme. In less than 24 hours, that woman's arrogance would become the catalyst for her own destruction. If this story of justice and revenge touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because you haven't seen anything yet compared to what this simple driver was about to do to one of the most powerful women in Chicago. Jonathan's public humiliation was just beginning. Isabella, energized by the attention her walking joke was generating, decided to take the spectacle to a new level of cruelty. Everyone. She clapped her hands as if calling little dogs. "I want everyone to meet my dear Jonathan. He has driven for me for 3 whole years and never missed a single meeting." The crowd of socialites laughed politely, but their expressions revealed the discomfort of those who knew they were witnessing something morally questionable. Victoria Ashworth, always eager to participate in other people's drama, approached with a venomous smile. "Isabella, you're terrible. Poor man." She turned to Jonathan with a falsely maternal expression. "I hope you know this is just a joke between friends, dear." Jonathan kept his posture upright, but inside, every fiber of his being vibrated with painful memories that these people could never imagine. 3 years ago, when his mother had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, he had abandoned a promising future at the Morrison & Associates law firm to take care of her. The experimental treatments cost more than $15,000 a month, and insurance covered only a ridiculous fraction of that. "Jonathan dear," Isabella continued her show, "tell everyone about that day you got lost on your way to my charity event." She laughed loudly. He drove around downtown for 2 hours because he didn't know how to use the GPS properly. The truth, which Jonathan kept as a secret wound, was completely different. That day, he had received a call from the hospital informing him that his mother had fallen into a coma. He drove desperately between the hospital and Isabella's event, trying to fulfill his professional obligations while his heart was breaking. Isabella never knew, and never cared enough to ask, why he arrived 2 hours late with red eyes from holding back tears. You know what's funny? Isabella continued, clearly intoxicated by the attention. He always speaks so, politely. Almost as if he went to some fancy school. The group burst out laughing, as if the idea of a black driver having a college education was the most absurd thing in the world. Dr. Richmond Thompson, a renowned cardiologist present at the party, frowned discreetly. There was something about Jonathan's posture, his careful choice of words, that didn't fit the stereotype Isabella was trying to sell. But before he could fully process this observation, he was interrupted by the hostess's shrill voice. Oh, and there's more. Isabella was clearly having too much fun to stop. Last month, he had the audacity to ask for a raise. Can you believe it? As if driving were some kind of specialized job. She took another sip of champagne. I told him, Jonathan dear, you should be grateful you have a job. Many like you don't even have that. That was the last straw Jonathan had been waiting for. Not because she had insulted him directly, but because Isabella had just confessed, in front of 24 respectable witnesses, her explicit racial discrimination in the workplace. Every word that came out of her mouth was being mentally catalogued and stored for future use. What Isabella didn't know was that Jonathan had spent the last 6 months not only driving, but secretly working with Marcus Chun, a financial investigator he had met during his time at Northwestern. Marcus was helping him meticulously track Isabella's questionable financial transactions, and each new public humiliation only strengthened the case of discrimination and abuse of power they were building. You know what I always say, Isabella continued, gesturing dramatically, it's important to give opportunities to people like him. It's our social responsibility to help the less fortunate. The toxic paternalism in her voice caused several people in the crowd to exchange uncomfortable glances. Jonathan watched silently as Dr. Thompson walked away from the group, visibly upset. The French diplomat's wife also seemed to be re-evaluating her presence at the party. Each ignorant comment from Isabella was alienating her own guests, slowly destroying her social reputation even as she believed she was having fun at his expense. Tell me, Jonathan, Victoria interjected again, do you have a family? Young children. Her question had a cloying falseness that made one's stomach churn. I cared for my mother until she passed away last year, Jonathan replied with a dignity that caused several people in the crowd to pause their conversations. The pure sincerity in his voice contrasted brutally with the cruel frivolity that dominated the atmosphere. An awkward silence fell over the group for a few seconds. Isabella, clearly upset at having momentarily lost control of the narrative, forced a laugh. How tragic. Well, at least now you can focus entirely on your work with me. But Jonathan saw something in the eyes of some of the people around him, a spark of human recognition that Isabella had completely missed. These small cracks in her social armor would be crucial to what he planned to do soon. Dr. Thompson approached discreetly. My condolences on the loss of your mother, he said with genuine sincerity. I know how difficult it is to care for someone we love during a terminal illness. Thank you, Doctor, Jonathan replied, and for the first time that evening, his smile was completely genuine. It was exactly this kind of unexpected alliance he had hoped to cultivate. Isabella, realizing she was losing attention, raised her voice again. Well, enough of this melancholy talk. Jonathan, why don't you go get us all some drinks? Show us how useful you are. She waved her hand as if dismissing a servant. Just then, as everyone laughed again at his calculated humiliation, Jonathan felt his phone vibrate discreetly. A message from Marcus. I got access to the offshore bank files. It's worse than we thought. When you want to pull the trigger, just let me know. For a brief second, an almost imperceptible smile crossed Jonathan's lips. Isabella, observing his expression, misinterpreted it as resigned submission. See? He's a good man. He knows his place, she commented to Victoria, who nodded approvingly. Each new humiliation only fueled something growing silently inside Jonathan. Not blind rage, but a calculated determination that had been forged through years of injustice, personal loss, and forced resilience. While everyone around him saw only a black driver being humiliated for entertainment, he saw each insult as another piece of evidence that would completely destroy the world of undeserved privilege that Isabella had built on the backs of people like him. But what neither he nor Isabella knew was that someone else at the party had begun to pay very close attention to what was happening, and that person had the power to dramatically accelerate the plans for justice that Jonathan had been carefully orchestrating for months. As Isabella continued her degrading performance for the guests, Jonathan discreetly slipped away toward the bar. His mind, however, was not focused on the humiliations he had just endured, but on the hundreds of hours of meticulous preparation that had brought him to this very moment. 6 months ago, during one of his countless trips to the airport for Isabella, he had recognized a familiar figure in the departure area, Marcus Chun, his Northwestern classmate who now worked as a federal financial investigator. The reunion had been casual, but the conversation that followed would completely change the course of his life. "Jonathan? Dude, what are you doing here?" Marcus had asked, genuinely surprised to see his former classmate dressed as a chauffeur. "Work," Jonathan had replied simply, but something in the tone of his voice made Marcus stop and really look at him. The sharp intelligence was still there, as was the determination that everyone admired in college, but there was something new, a calculated patience that could only come from someone who had faced real injustice. During that 40-minute conversation at the airport, Jonathan had carefully shared some of the inconsistencies he had noticed in Isabella's financial behavior. Marcus, an expert in white-collar crime, immediately recognized the classic patterns of tax evasion and money laundering. "Do you have any concrete evidence?" Marcus had asked, already knowing that Jonathan would not have mentioned anything without solid documentation. 3 years of evidence," Jonathan had replied calmly. "Recordings, photographs of documents, records of suspicious trips, bank transfers discussed openly in the car. She treats me like furniture. She never imagined I might be paying attention to every detail." From that day on, the two had begun working together secretly. Marcus provided technical guidance on what kind of evidence would be most valuable legally, while Jonathan continued his privileged position as an invisible observer in Isabella's life. Back at the party, Jonathan watched Isabella gesticulate dramatically to a group of influential businesspeople. "You wouldn't believe the stories I have about problematic employees," she was saying, clearly referring to him. "For example, my driver over there insisted on taking the day off for his mother's funeral, as if that were more important than my business commitments." Dr. Thompson, who had remained close enough to hear, frowned deeply. As a doctor, he had lost patients to cancer and knew intimately the emotional toll it took on families. Isabella's complete lack of empathy was beginning to upset several people in attendance. "Excuse me," Dr. Thompson interrupted politely. "You denied time off for your employee's mother's funeral?" Isabella laughed as if the question were absurd. "Doctor, you clearly don't understand how business works. When you pay someone for a job, that job comes first. Personal sentimentality cannot interfere with productivity." The awkwardness in the group was palpable. Several people exchanged incredulous glances. Mrs. Patricia Foster, wife of a diplomat known for his humanitarian work, discreetly stepped away from the circle. Jonathan, watching the gradual deterioration of Isabella's social reputation, felt his phone vibrate again. A message from Marcus. "I was able to track the offshore accounts. Total evaded, $847 million over 5 years. I have federal authorization for a full investigation. Do you have the recording of her confessing about the Cayman Islands?" Jonathan discreetly typed back, "I do. Plus 47 other recorded confessions. She would never have imagined that someone like me would have the technical or legal ability to use this against her." The irony was devastating. During his years at Northwestern, Jonathan had specialized in corporate financial crimes, exactly the kind of case Isabella had handed him on a silver platter during 3 years of arrogance. Every suspicious trip she took, every confidential phone conversation about illegal transfers, every document she carelessly left in the back seat had been methodically catalogued. Marcus had been impressed with the quality of Jonathan's documentation. "Man, this is better than 90% of the cases we get from professional whistleblowers. You've turned 3 years of abuse into a perfect federal case file." But Jonathan's preparation went beyond financial documentation. Over the past few months, he had quietly cultivated relationships with other employees mistreated by Isabella. Sophia, the personal assistant who had been fired for insubordination after questioning questionable practices. Robert, the accountant who had been forced to sign documents he knew were illegal. Carmen, the cleaning lady who had been blamed and fired when Isabella lost jewelry that was later found in her own safe. Each of them had agreed to testify when the time came. Isabella had inadvertently created an army of witnesses through her own systemic cruelty. "Jonathan." Isabella's shrill voice cut through his thoughts. "Stop standing there like a statue and come here." I want my guests to see how obedient you are. He approached calmly, but Dr. Thompson intercepted him. Can I talk to you for a moment? He asked the young man, completely ignoring Isabella. Of course, doctor, Jonathan replied, noticing Isabella's growing irritation at having lost control of the situation. Dr. Thompson took him a few steps away from the group. You mentioned that you took care of your mother during her illness. May I ask what kind of cancer? Pancreatic stage 4, Jonathan replied with the quiet dignity that characterized all his interactions. Dr. Thompson nodded gravely. One of the most aggressive forms. You must have gone through some very difficult times. Caring for a terminally ill loved one while maintaining professional responsibilities. That requires extraordinary strength. Thank you, doctor. She taught me that dignity is not something others can take from you, only something you can choose to surrender. Dr. Thompson studied Jonathan's face for a moment. There was something in the way he spoke, in his precise choice of words, that didn't align with the image Isabella was trying to paint. May I ask about your educational background? Jonathan hesitated for only a second. Northwestern University. Law degree, specializing in corporate crime. Dr. Thompson's eyes widened. You're a lawyer? Graduated magna cum laude, doctor. Family circumstances forced me to take the first job available 3 years ago. Dr. Thompson looked back at Isabella, who was now complaining loudly about losing the attention of her entertainment. Does she know that? Jonathan smiled for the first time that evening, but it was a smile that carried 3 years of accumulated injustices. Dr. Thompson, Isabella Montenegro never bothered to ask me anything about my life other than whether I knew how to drive. To her, people like me exist only to serve people like her. My God, Dr. Thompson murmured. She has no idea who you really are. No, doctor. But she'll find out very soon. At that moment, Jonathan's phone vibrated with a final message from Marcus. Search warrant approved for tomorrow at 6 a.m. The FBI will start with her offices. Do you want to be there when her world comes crashing down? Jonathan looked across the room at Isabella, who was now trying to get his attention with impatient gestures. She was so absorbed in her performance of superiority that she didn't notice how several important guests had moved away, disturbed by her behavior. For 3 years, she had treated Jonathan like an inanimate object. Tomorrow, she would discover that she had been confessing her crimes to one of the most meticulous investigators the American justice system had ever trained. Dr. Thompson placed a hand on Jonathan's shoulder. I don't know what storm is brewing, young man, but something tells me that Isabella Montenegro is about to discover that she has profoundly underestimated the wrong person. Jonathan nodded calmly. Doctor, sometimes justice is slow in coming, but when it finally arrives, it brings with it all the force accumulated during the years of waiting. As he walked back toward Isabella, Jonathan carried in his pocket not only his phone with 47 incriminating recordings, but also a printed copy of the federal warrant that would completely change his former boss's life in less than 12 hours. But what neither Jonathan nor Isabella knew was that Dr. Thompson had just made a decision that would dramatically accelerate the events of the evening, a decision that would turn that elegant party into the stage for one of the most devastating public exposés Chicago high society would ever witness. Dr. Thompson could no longer remain silent. After discovering that Jonathan was a trained lawyer being publicly humiliated by an ignorant socialite, something inside him rebelled against the blatant injustice he was witnessing. Isabella, Dr. Thompson abruptly interrupted her cruel performance. May I speak with you for a moment? In private. Isabella, annoyed at having her fun interrupted, rolled her eyes. Doctor, I'm busy entertaining my guests. Trust me, Dr. Thompson said with a firmness that caused several people to stop their conversations. You're going to want to hear what I have to say. Intrigued, Isabella followed him a few steps away from the group. Dr. Thompson lowered his voice, but not enough that Jonathan and a few other nearby guests couldn't hear. Do you realize you just spent the last 30 minutes publicly humiliating a lawyer who graduated magna cum laude from Northwestern University? Isabella's smile vanished instantly. What? Your driver, as you insist on calling him, is Jonathan Williams, an expert in corporate financial crimes. You literally confessed to racial discrimination in the workplace in front of 24 respectable witnesses. Isabella felt the blood freeze in her veins. She glanced quickly at Jonathan, who remained calm, but now there was something different in his eyes, a serene confidence she had never noticed before. That's impossible, she stammered. He's just a driver. Isabella, Dr. Thompson continued relentlessly, you treated a highly qualified professional like furniture for 3 years. In front of all of us, you confessed that you denied him time off for his mother's funeral. You literally said that people like him should be grateful to have any job at all. Reality began to crystallize for Isabella like an avalanche in slow motion. Every insult, every humiliation, every discriminatory comment she had made, all of it in front of witnesses. And worse, in front of a lawyer who specialized in exactly the kind of lawsuit she had just handed him on a silver platter. Jonathan approached calmly. Miss Montenegro, I believe you need to know a few things. For the first time in 3 years, Isabella really looked at Jonathan, not as an object, but as a person. And what she saw terrified her: sharp intelligence, calculated calm, and something that looked dangerously close to satisfaction. You tricked me, she whispered. No, Jonathan replied with unflappable dignity. You simply never bothered to ask who I really was. For 3 years, you confessed to federal crimes in the back seat of my car, treating me as if I were deaf and dumb. Isabella felt her legs buckle. What crimes? What are you talking about? Jonathan calmly took out his cell phone. Miss Montenegro, do you remember the conversation about the transfers to the Cayman Islands? 3 weeks ago, Monday, at approximately 2:30 p.m. I don't. I managed to transfer another $2 million to the Cayman Islands without the IRS having a clue where the money is. Jonathan repeated her exact words with devastating accuracy. You shouted it into the phone, laughing as if it were the funniest thing in the world. Isabella's face was now completely pale. Around them, a circle of guests had formed, all listening to every word with horrified fascination. I have 47 similar recordings, Jonathan continued calmly. 3 years of meticulously documented evidence of tax evasion, money laundering, and workplace discrimination. My colleague Marcus Chun, a federal financial investigator, has confirmed that your illegal activities totaled $847 million in evaded taxes. You can't, that's illegal recording without permission. Illinois is a one-party consent state for recordings, Jonathan replied with the professorial tone he used in college. And as your employee documenting crimes in my workplace, I have full legal protection. Isabella began to breathe rapidly, panicking. You don't understand. I can ruin you. I can make sure you never get a job again. Dr. Thompson laughed bitterly. Isabella, you're threatening a lawyer who just documented 3 years of your federal crimes. In front of all of us. Miss Montenegro, Jonathan said, pulling a folded document from the inside pocket of his suit, this is the federal search and seizure warrant authorized for your offices. Execution begins tomorrow at 6 a.m. Isabella's hands trembled when she saw the official document. How did you get this? Marcus and I have been working together for 6 months, methodically building the case against you. Every insult, every humiliation, every criminal confession you offered me for free has been catalogued and handed over to the appropriate authorities. Victoria Ashworth, who had watched everything in shocked silence, finally found her voice. Isabella, my God, what have you done? She built her own destruction, Dr. Thompson replied. 3 years of evidence voluntarily handed over to a corporate crime expert she treated like furniture. Isabella looked desperately around the circle of horrified faces. People she had considered friends now stared at her with a mixture of disgust and fascination. Her social reputation, built over decades, was crumbling in real time. Jonathan, she whispered, we can talk about this. I can make it up to you. I can. Miss Montenegro, Jonathan interrupted gently, justice is not for sale. You had 3 years to treat me like a human being. You chose not to. At that moment, Isabella's cell phone began to ring insistently. She stared at the screen with glazed eyes. It was her accountant, probably already knowing that something had gone terribly wrong. Tomorrow morning, Jonathan concluded, federal agents will be at your offices, your bank accounts will be frozen, and you will discover what it means to face the consequences of your actions. Isabella slumped heavily into a nearby chair, the reality of her situation finally sinking in completely. The empire she had built through crime, arrogance, and prejudice was about to crumble, destroyed by the man she had most brutally underestimated. As the guests whispered among themselves and gradually moved away from her as if she were radioactive, one question remained in the thick air of the hall. Would it be possible for someone so consumed by her own superiority to learn any lessons from the wreckage of her destroyed life, or would the arrogance that had brought her to this moment prevent? her from understanding the magnitude of her fall until it was too late for any redemption. 6 months later, Jonathan Williams walked the halls of the prestigious law firm Chun and Associates as a partner specializing in financial crimes. The same man Isabella had treated like furniture now led Chicago's most talked-about federal case. Isabella Montenegro was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for tax evasion and money laundering. Her assets were confiscated, her accounts frozen, and she lost literally everything she had built through crime and arrogance. "Dr. Williams," Marcus Chin called out as he entered the office, "the press wants an interview about the Montenegro case." Jonathan smiled softly. "You can tell them I prefer to let justice speak for itself." In federal prison, Isabella spent her days reflecting on how she had handed over 3 years of criminal evidence to a lawyer who specialized in exactly the crimes she committed. Every insult, every humiliation had been meticulously documented by the man she considered inferior to Dr. Thompson, now a close friend of Jonathan's, often commented, "I've never seen anyone build their own destruction with such unconscious dedication." Victoria Ashworth and the other socialites who had laughed that night now avoided any mention of the name Isabella Montenegro. Their reputations had also been tarnished by association with the scandal. Jonathan established a foundation offering free legal services to victims of workplace discrimination. Ironically, the money recovered from Isabella's crimes financed part of the project. "The best revenge," Jonathan explained to young lawyers, "is not to destroy those who have harmed you. It is to use the injustice you have suffered as fuel to build something greater than your oppressors could ever imagine." 3 years of driving for an arrogant criminal had turned into the case that defined his career and brought justice to hundreds of similar victims. Isabella tried to destroy Jonathan by treating him as inferior, but ended up giving him the tools for her own destruction. True justice came when he proved that dignity, intelligence, and perseverance always win over arrogance and prejudice. This story of overcoming adversity touched your heart. Subscribe to the channel to discover more real cases where justice prevailed over injustice, proving that no one is inferior to anyone else. Some just need the right opportunity to shine.